Look, we're from the same generation. We're both from the Midwest, different parts of the Midwest.
Right.
I know a lot of guys like J.D. Vance. I run into a lot of guys like him. The other thing you get to do at a convention is roll out your vice presidential candidate, which in this case was J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
I know him a little bit.
What do you think of him?
I think it's a profound contradiction, but maybe it's not that complicated. I know there are a lot of folks who say, what's going on with some of these Silicon Valley folks veering into Trump world with J.D. Vance and backing Trump? What are they thinking? Silicon Valley is supposed to be, they're supposed to care about climate. They're supposed to be, pro-science.
Remember when J.D. Vance called Trump America's Hitler and said his policies were cultural heroin? Well, now he's Trump's biggest cheerleader. Funny how a VP nomination changes things. Bill Maher just exposed this flip-flop on his show, and Trump's reaction is exactly what you'd expect. In this video, we're breaking down how Bill Maher masterfully dissected Vance's journey from Trump critic to Trump puppet. From hillbilly elegy author to political opportunist, Vance's transformation is a case study in selling out that even made Trump lose his cool. And wait until you hear what Maher said about Vance's working class hero act. Quick favor before we move on. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 92% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great, thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the video.
But I mean, for somebody whose identity is that they're connected to Appalachia, which has an opioid crisis, that really is the darkest thing you could possibly say about Donald Trump. At least in public, but behind the scenes, apparently he's actually calling him Hitler, right? And 5 years ago, that seemed like being the anti-Trump Republican, so that's what he was. Talked about how he was unfit, how he was cynical, called him an opioid, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a person, but definitely a really...
Bill Maher didn't just take a casual glance at J.D. Vance's past. He put the VP candidate's entire life story under the microscope, and what he found wasn't pretty. Remember that best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, that had everyone talking a few years back? That book positioned Vance as this authentic voice of the forgotten working class. He was the guy who understood poverty in Appalachia because he lived it. He was the poster boy for pulling yourself up by your bootstraps while still remembering where you came from. Well, Maher wasn't buying it anymore, and he made sure his audience wasn't either. The late-night host methodically dismantled Vance's working-class hero image by showing exactly how far he strayed from those roots. Maher didn't just criticize Vance's words, he went after his actions. The comedian pulled up damning evidence showing how Vance has completely flipped his position on helping the communities he once claimed to champion. "Let me get this straight," Maher said with that signature raised eyebrow. "This guy wrote an entire book about growing up poor, understanding addiction, and the struggles of the working class in America. And now he's voting against every program that might actually help those people?" The audience responded with a mixture of laughs and groans. The kind of reaction you get when something is funny, but also painfully true. But the real kicker came when Maher exposed Vance's new circle of friends. For a guy who supposedly represents the common folk, he sure spends a lot of time with Silicon Valley billionaires these days. Maher showcased how Vance has cozied up to the wealthy elite he once criticized, accepting their money to fund his political ambitions while pushing policies that benefit them, not the hillbillies he wrote about. The audience burst into laughter when Maher delivered his most devastating line. Vance went from writing about hillbillies to becoming the guy who forecloses on their homes. It wasn't just a joke. It was a perfect encapsulation of Vance's betrayal. The segment got even more powerful when Maher played a series of clips showing Vance talking about addiction and poverty in 2016 compared to his current positions. In one clip, Vance eloquently described understanding the struggles of addiction after watching his mother battle substance abuse. Cut to present day. Vance voting against expanded addiction treatment programs. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Maher didn't stop there. He He displayed quotes from Hillbilly Elegy, where Vance expressed deep empathy for those struggling in post-industrial America, then immediately showed Vance's recent votes against minimum wage, increases, expanded healthcare, and food assistance programs. Each example hit harder than the last. The tension in the room was palpable when Maher looked directly into the camera and asked the question on everyone's mind. So what happened to the guy who supposedly cared so much about working people? The audience went silent. They knew the answer, but Maher was about to spell it out anyway. And that's when the comedian delivered the knockout punch. He explained how Vance's entire hillbilly persona was nothing more than a carefully crafted image, one that served its purpose in selling books and building his brand, but was quickly discarded when it no longer aligned with his political ambitions. The working class hero act was just that, an act. The problem isn't that people change, Maher explained. The problem is when they pretend to be something they're not just to get ahead. The audience nodded in agreement. Vance sold his story as authentic, but it turns out the only authentic thing about him is his willingness to abandon any principle if it means more power. Maher showed how Vance's transformation perfectly aligned with his rising political ambitions. As his desire for higher office grew, his connection to the working class values he once espoused seemed to shrink. The audience watched as Maher traced this evolution, from best-selling author speaking truth to power, to political candidate speaking whatever would get him power. This isn't just typical political flip-flopping, Maher insisted. This is someone who built their entire public identity around understanding the struggles of a specific community, only to turn around and push policies that actively harm that same community. The crowd murmured in agreement. The segment reached its crescendo when Maher delivered his final verdict on Vance's transformation. He's less hillbilly, more elegy for his own integrity. The audience erupted with applause and laughter. It was the perfect summation of Vance's journey from authenticity to opportunism. The integrity elegy was just the opening act. Maher was about to reveal a political transformation so dramatic, it makes caterpillars turning into butterflies look consistent by comparison. With surgical precision, Maher assembled a damning video montage showcasing Vance's greatest anti-Trump hits from years past. The audience gasped as they witnessed the stark contrast between Vance's past condemnations and his current fawning praise. "This isn't just a flip-flop," Maher declared as the screens behind him lit up with Vance's old tweets and interview clips. "This is an Olympic-level somersault with a triple twist." The first clip showed Vance labeling Trump as America's Hitler, not just disagreeing with his policies, but comparing him to history's most reviled dictator. The audience's jaws collectively dropped. But Maher was just warming up. He showcased another gem where Vance described Trump's policies as cultural heroin, a particularly striking metaphor coming from someone whose own mother battled addiction. "So Trump was basically political drugs to Vance," Maher quipped, "and apparently addiction runs in the family because now he can't get enough of the guy." The comedy veteran then split the screen to display these blistering critiques, alongside recent footage of Vance practically singing Trump's praises. "Look at this transformation," Maher exclaimed as the audience howled. "It's like watching someone go from being the president of the I Hate Broccoli Club to suddenly opening a vegetable farm and claiming they've always loved green food." Maher continued reading from his collection of Vance's greatest anti-Trump hits, including quotes where Vance had called Trump noxious and accused him of leading the white working class to a very dark place. With each example, the audience's laughter grew more uproarious, not because the quotes themselves were funny, but because the contrast with today's Vance was so absurd. "So what could possibly make someone do such a complete 180? Maher asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Could it be, I don't know, naked ambition and a VP nomination?" The crowd erupted in knowing applause. "Vance changed positions faster than a yoga instructor with ADHD." The joke landed perfectly. sending ripples of laughter throughout the studio. The comedian didn't stop at just showing the quotes. He meticulously laid out a timeline of Vance's transformation that correlated suspiciously well with his rising political aspirations. "Notice anything interesting about this timeline?" Maher asked. Every time Vance got closer to running for office, his opinion of Trump magically improved. It's like watching someone slowly fall in love with their kidnapper. The timeline revealed how Vance's harshest criticisms came when he was promoting his book and had no political skin in the game. As he began eyeing a Senate run, the rhetoric softened slightly. By the time he announced his candidacy, all traces of Trump criticism vanished, replaced by effusive praise. "This isn't evolution," Maher noted. "It's political calculation so transparent you could use it as a window." The tension in the segment peaked when Maher posed a serious question. What does it say about a man who's willing to bow down to someone he once called dangerous and unfit for office? The audience fell silent, contemplating the implications. And what does it say about that someone who's willing to select a running mate who once labeled him America's Hitler? Either Trump didn't do his homework, or, more likely, he just loves the ego boost of watching former critics grovel at his feet. Maher drove home his point by juxtaposing two final clips. One of Vance fiercely criticizing Trump supporters for being blinded by celebrity, and another of Vance himself fawning over Trump at a recent rally. "This, ladies and gentlemen," Maher declared, "is what political prostitution looks like." And Vance isn't even trying to hide it. He's standing on the corner in fishnet stockings, waving at passing cars. The segment reached its ultimate payoff when Maher suggested that Vance's transformation wasn't just disappointing, it was dangerous. When someone shows you who they are by completely changing who they are, he warned, what they're really showing you is that they stand for absolutely nothing except their own advancement. The audience nodded along soberly before Maher lightened the mood with his closing barb. "You know, JD doesn't stand for Juris Doctor anymore." He paused for effect. "It stands for just desperate for power." The studio erupted one final time as Maher's perfectly timed punchline landed. Maher's perfectly timed punchline was still echoing through the studio when the real fireworks began. While the audience was laughing at the just desperate quip, Trump was already hammering away at his keyboard with the fury of a man whose fragile ego had just taken another hit. The former president's reaction wasn't just predictable, it was a masterclass in how not to handle criticism. Within minutes of Maher's segment airing, Trump's social media account erupted like a volcano of caps lock and exclamation points. "Unfunny Bill Maher should stick to his failing comedy career instead of attacking great patriots like J.D. Vance," read the first post, complete with Trump's signature random capitalization and questionable grammar. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more revealing. Maher dedicated his next show to displaying these posts on a giant screen, each one more unhinged than the last. "Look at this, folks," he said, gesturing to the wall of text behind him. "This is what happens when you hit a nerve so raw that the former president of the United States turns into a human caps lock button." The audience howled as Maher scrolled through Trump's digital tantrum. As the posts continued, Trump's defense of Vance became increasingly bizarre. "Many people change their minds about me when they see how great I am," Trump wrote, completely missing the point of Maher's criticism. It wasn't about people naturally changing their minds. It was about Vance's opportunistic 180-degree turn that conveniently aligned with his political ambitions. "Notice something interesting here," Maher asked his audience. "Trump isn't defending Vance's principles or explaining his evolution of thought. He's making it all about himself. In Trump's mind, Vance didn't change positions because of political expediency. He changed because he finally recognized Trump's supposed greatness." The comedian couldn't resist pointing out how Trump's reaction proved exactly what he'd been saying all along. "This is a guy so thin-skinned that he makes tissue paper look like rhino hide," Maher joked. His posts read like they were written by an angry toddler who just learned how to use a keyboard. Actually, that's not fair. Most toddlers have better spelling. What was most telling wasn't what Trump said, but what he didn't say. At no point did the former president address any of the substance behind Maher's critique. There was no explanation for Vance's dramatic transformation from Trump critic to Trump devotee. There was no defense of the policy flip-flops. There was only personal attack after personal attack directed at Maher himself. "Nobody watches his terrible show," Trump ranted in another post, despite Nielsen ratings suggesting otherwise. "His hair is fake, and so are his jokes." The audience practically fell out of their chairs when Maher responded, "My hair may be thinning, Donald, but at least I don't have to spend 2 hours every morning constructing an elaborate golden helmet of delusion." The most revealing part of Trump's meltdown was his instinct to defend Vance despite their complicated history. When Trump defends Vance, it's like one con man vouching for another. "They deserve each other," Maher told his audience, who erupted in applause. Two opportunists circling the same drain, each using the other for their own purposes. Maher then displayed a particularly unhinged post where Trump claimed that Bill Maher wishes he had the ratings I get, but he'll never be as popular as me. The comedian paused dramatically before responding, "Yes, Donald, I've always dreamed of having the approval rating you had leaving office. That's been my life's ambition, to be the only president in modern history to never crack 50% approval." What really seemed to trigger Trump's social media spiral was Maher's implication that the former president had been duped by a man who once compared him to Hitler. "Trump can't stand the idea that he might have been played," Maher explained. "He needs to believe that Vance's transformation is genuine admiration, rather than what it really is, a calculated political move by someone willing to say and do anything to advance his career." The comedian concluded the segment by pointing out the irony of Trump's reaction. "Nothing proves a point better than Trump having a meltdown over it," he said with a satisfied smile. "I say Vance is an opportunist who will say anything to get ahead, and Trump immediately proves my point by defending him in the most self-centered way possible. Thanks for the confirmation, Donald." So what's the bigger lesson from Maher's brutal takedown of J.D. Vance? It's not just good TV, it's a wake-up call about political chameleons who will say absolutely anything to climb the power ladder. Maher's critique shows how political opportunism threatens democracy itself. When someone jumps from calling a politician dangerous to becoming their devoted sidekick, voters should question the authenticity of everything else they claim to stand for. This shift from critic to supporter isn't just hypocrisy. It's a calculated betrayal of stated principles for personal advancement. As Maher reminds us, in politics, when someone completely transforms their core values, that transformation itself reveals their true character.